Great. Thanks so much, everybody. I see everyone started to introduce themselves in the chat, which is really, really exciting to see. So hello, everybody, and welcome to Money Talk, where we're going to be talking about redefining our investments for justice and sustainability. So to just do a couple of housekeeping things, we are going to be recording the session. So this is not to use anyone's messaging unless they wouldn't like to be. So if you would like to be taken out of the recording at all, if you want to ask a question later, that is totally fine. But we will be recording so that we can share it with those people who've let us know that they'd really like to attend but aren't able to. So that's the first piece of housekeeping underway. And the second is to just keep your microphone muted, please, when the speakers are busy, especially, so that we can let them be undisturbed. But you're welcome to unmute yourself later on if you do have a question to ask. That being said, as you have already been doing, the chat is free game for respectful conversation, of course. And so use that to introduce yourself if you haven't already, to also add and contribute to the conversation as we go along. And I will try and monitor the chat as we're going. So obviously today we're here doing Money Talk, talking about our investments, redefining them for justice and sustainability. And we're doing that in celebrating the legacy of Mandela. And the official theme for this year is in our hands, or it's in your hands. And with the Nelson Mandela Foundation addressing climate change and hunger as one of those themes. I see we're having some people struggling with audio in the chat. Can anyone let me know if that's a general struggle, or if Edna, perhaps that is your audio settings? Okay. Perhaps someone could just okay, great. You can hear as well, Alma. Thanks for letting us know. Perhaps someone can just let Edna know in the chat that she can perhaps try and reset her audio settings via the chat, please. Thanks so much. Obviously, we want everyone to be able to enjoy and be able to hear the webinar. So, back to the discussion. So just first things first, a little bit about me. My name is Sarah Robyn Farrell, and I have been in the climate movement since about 2018, fulfilling a multiple amount of roles, from fundraiser to campaigner to musician and writer, but importantly today, very privileged to be moderating this panel, and also in my role as divestment campaigner for Fossil Free South Africa. And since Fossil Free South Africa is the reason that we're here today, just wanting to do a little bit of an introduction on Fossil Free. So who is Fossil Free South Africa? So Fossil Free South Africa is the South African campaign for fossil fuel divestment and sustainable reinvestment. For anyone that isn't that familiar with the concept of divestment, it simply means removing investment. So it's the opposite of investment, getting rid of stocks, getting rid of bonds, getting rid of other investment funds that are considered unethical or morally ambiguous. So one of the largest movements for divestment we would have seen during the apartheid movement, which actually helped bring down the apartheid regime. And now fossil fuel divestment is a global movement that's amounting to about 40 trillion in endowments and portfolios joining in. And so fossil fuel divestment looks at removing that money from coal, oil, and gas companies, who are what research and science is telling us is the leading driver of the climate crisis that we're already seeing impact us in so many cross-cutting ways. So the core work of Fossil Free South Africa is the university work, the asset managers, and the climate communications. And just to let you know that the very start of Fossil Free actually happened at the University of Cape Town, and that's where the campaign grew, leading to the successful commitment of UCT to divest from fossil fuels. So we saw that happen quite recently, and we've already also seen some progress since that commitment. We also see the asset manager campaign, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but through the Invest Fossil Free campaign, and that this event today is based on the Invest Fossil Free campaign, which is really gaining public support for people who want to have investments that are free from those climate breaking oil, coal and gas investments. And so that's a little bit about fossil free. There's some other work as well around climate communications, such as the Planet A investment guide, which we'll share a link with you later, as well as some other campaigns. So just like most people in the NGO space, climate space, we're all very busy and got our hands full, but very privileged to be able to do this work. All right, so now getting to the reason why we're here, which is very important to listen to our amazing speakers today. And so thank you very much to Ashley Daswa, Brad McWalter, and Fossil Free's own David LePage for joining us to speak today. And instead of me introducing each person through reading their bio, we thought, why not let each person introduce themselves? And then we can also have the bio up for those who are interested to read a little bit about that. And so I ask maybe Ashley, if you can start us off, introduce yourself, 1 or 2 minutes, just a little bit about yourself, and also let us know a little icebreaker question, which is, what is the most memorable, sustainable, or environmentally friendly action that you've taken in your personal life? Over to you, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, and appreciate your time. And I'm grateful to be here today. I think these are conversations that we should have, and not just, you know, from the different sectors that we're in, but as a society, we should have conversations relating to how our monies are invested, and of course, the climate, the climate conversations that we confronted with. So as you all can see on the screen, I'm Ashley Daswa, and I think for me personally, I'm a senior investment specialist. And I deem myself to be a well-rounded investment professional, you know, with investment background in terms of asset allocation, which is pretty much saying we've got a pot of money, retirement savings for, you know, the main layman in the street who's working very hard, and we allocate that capital so that these individuals can retire comfortably, and they can retire also in a very sustainable society and the world in which they live in. Hence, you know, one of the key things that I do in my job is to ensure that we integrate responsible investment into the processes that we have when we invest these monies. I've been with Sanlam before, so I've rejoined them in December last year, but I've been with them for about 4 years in a different role. And prior to that, I was with Old Mutual Investment Strategy, where I was also doing pretty much the work relating to asset allocation and integration of responsible investments. And my career spent about a decade, and I've been with the likes of Aquilitas Capital Partners, Impact Amplifier, and State Street, to name a few. In terms of my qualifications, I hold a master's degree in finance cum laude from the University of the Western Cape. And I've also went further abroad to Forum University in New York, where I studied economics and also sustainable investment as my minor cum laude. So that's pretty much what I do. But I'm just, you know, a kid from the far north in Venda, Limpopo, who's really trying his best to just make a difference. And that speaks to your question in terms of the icebreaker, in terms of what I've done. So it's probably about 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I should say. When I was at university, I was part of what they call Green Campus Initiative. And this is where we are driving, you know, in terms of, you know, having cleaner campuses and cleaner initiatives, which are student-led, and I was part of that. And I'm grateful that my school, University of the Western Cape, actually won the challenge, I think, in 3 consecutive years, even post the time I was part of it and heading the team. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And that's really cool to hear. I myself found myself in the Green Campus Initiative, so it's very exciting to find a fellow person, and thanks for sharing that really impressive bio. So I pass on now to Brad McWalter. Could you introduce yourself to us and answer the same question?
Sure. How's it, everyone? So Brad McWalter here. I would like to refer to I prefer referring to myself as a financial navigator. So we are, all of us, on a journey heading towards some objective. And it is my honor to be invited on board these journeys with my clients. So my clients are the captains of their ship, and I fulfill a role as navigator. So I'd like to preface anything I say today with the fact that everything I say will be my perspective and my understanding and philosophy on various things. But before taking any type of decisive action on anything, it's very important to liaise or consult with a financial professional or financial advisor. So that's just to preface things. How I work is if you can imagine for a moment a penny farthing bicycle. You know those old bicycles. Imagine a dude with a top hat and a nice moustache, a big front wheel and a small back wheel. That big front wheel is the wheel that I call the wealth creation wheel. And that's the wheel that drives you through life. It's your business, your career, your investments, retirement planning, property, everything that is going to grow your wealth. On its own, it's a unicycle. And the back wheel, the smaller wheel, is the wealth protection wheel. And that's the stability factor. And so in there is one's insurances. And a will is like the bicycle frame that connects these things together. And so that's the ride that I try and help my clients with through journeying with them. Now, I think that a few people cannot change the world, okay? Few people might make an impact, but they're not going to change the world fundamentally. What it is, it's a collective. People need to come together to change the world, to make a swath, a sea of movement. And that is how things change in the world. So I believe where I sit in my role as an advisor, I sit between the client, I sit between the provider. And with respect to sustainable investing, that is a key area where I can help make a difference. And it's everybody fulfills a small role. We each have a small role to fulfill. And that circles back to it's in your hands. Today, Mandela Day, it's in your hands. And if we all play our part, we can work together to really create a better world. And so that's what I try and install and build. And I think to bring to the table something here is what I'd like to see more of is the advisor, financial planner, financial consultant. As I said, we all sit between the provider and we sit between the asset manager. There needs to be some kind of advisor consortium between that brings these points and creates awareness for the clients and then sits behind and drives the asset managers to do all the various things that we need and want them to do. So that's a little bit about me something that I've done. I got rid of my vehicle. So any short little small movement I need to make, I've got a bicycle now. And it just makes me feel so good on so many different levels. I won't get into that. And one final small little thing is what I wanted to say. I think this is important to note. One day I saw a guy throw something out of his car. I went, picked it up and threw it back into his car. What did he do? He threw it right back out the window again. And what it made me realize that it's not about shaming people and making them aware that they've done something bad. It's about saying to them, this is the right way to do it. Next time, let's see if we can work together. And that speaks back to the collective. So just a little observation there. Talking to myself, that was a definite lesson.
Thanks so much, Brad. And thanks. It's cool to see your sustainable action also linking up with the bicycle metaphor that you gave up earlier. It's very impressive to be able to bike everywhere, and I think that's really awesome. I know David was giving you a big thumbs up there. And that leaves you, last but not least, David, to introduce yourself, and then I think to go into your presentation, and then we'll circle back to you, Ashley and Brad, for further thoughts.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you all as guests with us for this presentation. My background is fairly straightforward. I'm a science and human rights journalist. But for the last nearly 10 years now, I've become a climate campaigner, and particularly a fossil fuel divestment campaigner. Fossil-free South Africa is now diversifying in the ways that we deal with climate change, and the fossil fuel industry in particular. So we've also got campaigns now for stopping greenwashing, and another campaign which we're in the process of launching for a ban on fossil fuel advertising here in Cape Town. Sustainable recent actions I've taken. Over the last 2 or 3 months, I've been trying to build a sort of small solar lighting system for our house. Not one of these more pricey systems, and been building that myself. And it's been quite a learning curve, and there might have been a couple of minor electrical fires that I haven't disclosed to my wife yet involved in the process. So that's been a bit of a journey. I think it's all fairly safe and secure now, and doing a job keeping us lit during load shedding. Okay, I'm going to go on to share my presentation. One of the things that we've done as Fossil Free South Africa in the last year is we've produced a guide for journalists called the Climate Reporting Guide. And I thought today I would kind of do a brief, what you might call a climate change news report. And so let's go with that. And here's me switching into news bulletin mode. Burning fossil fuels adds to a blanket of heat-trapping air pollution in the atmosphere. Since pre-industrial times, we have increased the concentration of carbon dioxide by 50% and the concentration of methane in the atmosphere by 250%. Average global temperatures in 2022 were 1.15 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. There are currently wildfires in Spain and Greece. 23 Italian cities, including Rome, Florence, Bologna, Bari, Catania, and Turin will be on red alert by Wednesday, with temperatures in Rome expected to reach 43 degrees centigrade. In the past 2 weeks, temperatures in Niger have hit 47 degrees. Globally, about 40% of the planet is experiencing a marine heat wave. Last year in Europe alone, there were 63,000 heat-related deaths. World hunger was decreasing until 2015, but has been increasing again since then. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the director of the World Health Organization, wrote this week on Twitter, "In many parts of the world today is predicted to be the hottest day on record, and these records have already been broken a few times this year. Heat waves put our health and lives at risk. The climate crisis is not a warning, it's happening. I urge world leaders to act now," end quote. On the upside, renewable energy, mostly new wind and solar, met 90% of last year's global growth in electricity generation. But at the same time, total global consumption of fossil fuels still continues to increase every year. Average global heating is still increasing and possibly accelerating. So I'm sorry to have to make these points. It's quite painful at times to consider these facts, but these are the facts that we're looking at. And this is some of you will remember the name James Hansen, one of the world's leading climate scientists who first sounded the alert on climate change in the 1980s before the US Congress. This is a graph that he and colleagues put together in the last couple of weeks, showing where we are here in 2023 and the possible warming trend that we face up to 2030 to 4050 if we're not very careful, and the chances are that we're going to be heading that way. This is the current growth in global fossil fuel consumption, still increasing with a tiny dip that you can see for the pandemic. There's a climate scientist in the US who is part of the movement called Scientist Rebellion, who says we are losing the war against the fossil fuel industry very badly, due largely to the fact that most people don't even know they're in a war against the fossil fuel industry. And that industry, by the way, despite their rhetoric about being committed to a transition and to ending climate change, 2022, for example, oil and gas companies spent just 1% of their profits on low carbon investments. Some people still think that fossil fuels are still necessary for our development, but in fact, it's now been established that coal, gas, and oil their use is now sabotaging all 17 of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So asset managers, by allocating capital, our capital, essentially design the future. And a couple of years ago, our friends at Just Share did a survey saying that while there are encouraging signs of local asset managers adopting the necessary approaches to effective climate risk integration, relatively few of them demonstrate excellence. Those that do align with international best practice do in some areas, but not all. So on the whole, while there are notable exceptions, South African asset managers still falling far short of what's needed to really address this crisis. I think it's fair to say that a working conclusion would be that we have to get much tougher with fossil fuel companies while working out how to fix the damage they've already done. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was with Nelson Mandela, part of the elders, has said, and he endorsed our campaign at UCT, people of conscience need to break their ties with corporations financing the injustice of climate change. And divestment is one of the ways to do that. To end on a slightly more hopeful note, to talk about the future that we'd really like to see, there's an amazing economist, Kate Raworth, who some of you may have heard of, who's designed this schema called donut economics. And she says, today's economy is divisive and degenerative by default. Today's economy must be distributive and regenerative by design. And that's the kind of future that we really need our money to be contributing to. Thanks.
Thanks so much, David. I think that's a really great note to end on. And then I can pass back to our other speakers. Let's pass back to you, Ashley, if you want to share thoughts further in terms of the work that you're doing, how your work is feeding into and supporting a sustainable future, and any other points that you'd like to raise, either in response to David's presentation or just in general. And then I'll pass to you as well, Brad. Thanks.
Yeah, happy. Thank you, Sarah. I hope you can hear me well. I had a problem with my speaker. Somehow my Zoom wasn't working. So, I mean, David paints a very good picture, even in terms of the work that we're doing, which is really about integrating responsible investment, rather ESG, which is the environmental, social, and governance, into our investment processes. We follow a science-based approach, and I think from what he presented, you can see that there's actually scientific or empirical evidence that backs this, and we admit that as a fact to say, look, there's quite a lot of emissions. But again, one of the things that we're mindful of is the fact that, yes, climate on the environmental side of things, it's a very much of a global phenomenon, which is, by and large, most of the countries in the global south are actually being affected, but the highest emitters are the likes of the US, China, and many other parts of the global north countries that are actually emitting, and yet we are the ones that are suffering. And with that in mind, the way we manage our portfolios, we are mindful of these things, but we also cognizant of the fact that in the society in which we live in South Africa in particular, or particularly in most of the emerging markets, yes, climate change conversations are there, but we are grappling with other societal issues such as unemployment, inequality, you name it, crime, etc. And the way we see it is that, there has to be some sort of a double materiality, that we've got to consider this and not consider the environmental to be more important than the social aspect. So is the governance aspect. And with that in mind, I think this is really the way in which we look at it, and how we transition our portfolios, because that's very important to David's point, is to say, most of us, as you and I who are on this call, we're working hard, and we want to retire comfortably at some point when we do. But the question that one would then ask is to say, how do you retire comfortably if you are going to retire in a world that perhaps there's high emission and the like? And we see it from the lenses of saying, let's transition our portfolio in a just manner so that we don't leave anybody behind. And that speaks to the skills transfer. That speaks to, how we get, the communities where, they are really affected. So if you think about the highest emitter, such as, Eskom, as one of the companies that is emitting quite significantly, if we want to do away with coal as a fossil fuel, we've got to think about how do we do that in a very just manner without leaving anybody behind. And we hold the view that there's a saying that nothing about us without us. We shouldn't leave the communities in which we exist behind when we really want to do away with, perhaps disinvestment from fossil fuel. But again, I think as I conclude, what is more important in our world where we are managing this pool of assets for a diverse kind of, retirement clients that are out there, we are cognizant of the fact that there are different scopes of emissions, all right? If you're gonna zone into David's presentation, which is scope 1, 2, and 3. And one of the things that is more important, and just in the interest of those who doesn't know what these are, scope 1 is just purely on the basis of the business activity in which the company does. So if you're talking about an insurance company in which I work for, as an example, we are insuring people, we underwrite policies, and we issue insurance to different clients. That's our core business. Scope 2 speaks to, I should say, things like power generation. So I'm sitting in an office now. The reason why these lights are on is because Eskom is burning fuel, is burning diesel, and is burning coal. That's scope 2. And then scope 3 then speaks to the value chain upstream and downstream. It speaks to the investments. It speaks to the traveling. So if I'm moving from Johannesburg to Cape Town, I'm going to be on a plane that is using fossil fuel. And we need to be able to take that into consideration. And in our world, one thing that we are driving is that asset managers, as the custodians of these assets that you and I have entrusted us to invest on your behalf, should be able to disclose scope 1, 2, and 3, and particularly on the investments, which is scope 3, to be mandatory, because it's equally important for you to be able to say, if I've got R1 million or worth of my retirement, how much is it that is contributing towards greenhouse gas emission? How much is it has got a fossil fuel exposure? Can I say that this is not aligned to my interest and I want to disinvest or not? And that's really the conversation that we have. But all in all, we are of the view that you have got to do it in a just manner. But at the same time, we purely believe that engagement is also important. And if the engagement has not been successful and there's been multiple escalation or legal recourse that has taken place, then disinvestment could be the last resort.
Thanks, Ashley, for bringing that perspective. I see we've got some messages in the chat, which we can get to just now. I'm going to pass over to you, Brad, to bring some of your perspective on the conversation.
Yeah, so I think that quote that David put up, most of people in the world don't even know we're fighting this war. I mean, the problem is in awareness. Who's doing what? Do we need to do anything? Is it even a problem? Most people in this world are just going along, living their lives. And there's not enough mass movement. There's not some energy across the world that's sitting with everybody day in, day out, because we're heading towards something. And so the way I look at it is when you invest, what are you investing for? The future, whether it's yourself, somebody else, or whatever you're doing, you're putting your money away for a future date. So that money in the future, it'd be nice to have a future to use that money in. And so I think it's very good to be able to tie these things together. And yes, there's so many different moving parts, It's the most difficult. I don't think you can draw up an equation for this even. I mean, there's people that need work, and there's certain industries that are entrenched and doing things in a specific way. And what happens when that funding gets lifted, or what happens when people there's just too many things to make it a simple thing to do. I think the best way to look at this is looking at, like, we're in an airplane, and the first thing, if there's turbulence, or not just turbulence, but if you lose cabin pressure, what happens? Oxygen masks come down. And the first thing you need to do before you take care of the child next to you is you need to put your mask on yourself so that you can take care of the person next to you. And so the idea here is what we need to do is we need to invest today for our future. How we do that, I think we're going to maybe talk a little bit more about that. But I think there really are too many different moving parts in order to make it to say this is what we should be doing or this is what we shouldn't be doing. And I have certain views on a whole bunch of different things, but I'm going to pause there and maybe see where we go.
Thanks very much, Brad. So I think before we open up some questions for discussion, and we'll still be opening up to the audience for discussion later, I just want to note a comment made in the chat, which I think alludes to an issue where sometimes the idea of the fact that the transition needs to be just, which it very much does, is used as an excuse for inaction or delayed action. And I think that is what a comment in the chat is alluding to. And maybe Ashley and David, you could respond your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to go ahead, and then I'll let David to proceed. I think, let me just use a classic example to say the environmental aspects are not more important than the social. So it's the other way around, right? If you think about it, how many jobs that were lost and that were not created when there was drought in Cape Town in 2018? How many jobs that people have lost, and lives for that matter, that were lost during the floods that happened in KZN? That's a function of a climate issue. We had drought in 2018 on the basis of climate-related issues, right? And so that results, I should say, to societal issues, that there's going to be unemployment, there's going to be inequality, and you name it. And I think it's quite important for us to be mindful of that. And even ourselves, you know, when we're meant to say we consider double materialities, it's on the basis of that, because we say, look, we can't actually have enough savings that we are going to invest for people if there are no jobs that are being created as a function of climate change. And I think that's really the lenses in which we look at it, to say, you know, these things are, I should say, a function of the other. You know, we're sitting here, people are not getting jobs. I mean, with load shedding as an example, you know, how many jobs are being lost? You know, how many people aren't getting employment as a basis of that? And I think we've got to think about it deeper. But again, also from the point of transitioning the portfolios, you can't just wake up and say you're going to disinvest from all the counters that are listed in the JSE that are, I should say, fossil fuel producers. So your Exxaro, your Sasol and the like. You are more likely going to sacrifice your financial returns, which is what Brad spoke about. That is what you intend to achieve in the future. But you can actually influence if there is more like shareholder activism, if there is more collaborative effort. And as I've mentioned earlier on, to say, if there is no recourse in all these activities that you have done, you are left with an option to disinvest. So I agree that many people say, let's do it in a just manner, and that come across as if it's an excuse. But I think one thing that is more important is how we track the progress of these types of engagements that we're doing with the portfolio companies. And I think for me, that's really how we approach even in our investments, because we believe that it can result in a material divergence of return if you don't have investment into a portfolio, a specific portfolio company. If you look at our local market, the JSE, it has shrunk significantly, and it has got a very concentration on resource companies, which are mining stocks and financials. So if you do not have any of those material, if you don't have
a substantial amount of those resource companies in your portfolio, you are more likely not going to achieve the desired returns. And again, at the end of the day, nothing needs to suffer at an expense of the other. You don't have to sacrifice your financial return at an expense of your, I should say, your environmental outcome. Hence, we believe that what is more important is to consider global markets. So most of the companies or investment managers in the global north, they've done disinvestment. They've disinvested in these fossil fuel companies, and they've got portfolios that are running quite efficiently. And I think I appreciate what UCT have done, because that's the stance that they've took, that they want to do this from the global market. And if it doesn't, if there is no traction happening in the local market, that's when they're going to start enforcing it. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. On to you, David. And maybe just to add to your comment, where there's a comment here on how many people have been left behind in fossil investment to date as well. And so maybe just adding that perspective as well as you also answer, David. Thanks.
Yeah, Ashley, I mean, I think firstly to talk about the just transition point, I mean, I think we're already dealing with a coal industry that is on the verge of turning around and declining even in South Africa. But what we're still seeing in South Africa and not is a lot of talk about new gas and new oil. And I really don't think that you can talk about new investment in gas and oil as being part of a just transition. That's new investment that's not needed. You're not taking care of existing jobs. You're talking about creating new jobs in the fossil fuel industry, and I think that should be avoided. With respect to the point that you raise about people wanting returns, I mean, I spoke to a conference of financial advisors in Johannesburg last year, partly through Brad's assistance. Thank you again, Brad. And I was struck by how many people said that actually returns are important, but they're not the be-all and end-all for them. And some people, quite a lot of people, are prepared to take a small hit to their returns if they know that they're going to be investing in something that they really feel their heart is in. And so I think the focus of asset managers on getting the very best returns, and that's just a financial return, we're not talking about the social and environmental returns now, is often quite misplaced. And while I applaud your commitment to dialogue and to engagement, not all of your industry peers are as committed to engagement. Alan Gray, for example, we sent a letter to them requesting a discussion about the option of creating a fossil fuel free fund, not for the whole of their investment portfolio, not divestment across the board, but just for those of their clients who want that fund. And so far, Alan Gray have refused even to meet to discuss this with representatives of their own clients. So unfortunately, that industry commitment is not always there. I see there are quite a few people saying in the comments things like environmental cannot really be separated from social, and I would echo that. I think, but I think you were reflecting on that as well, just in your comments, Ashley. So I'll leave it there for now.
Great, thank you. I think opening up another dimension or question, looking possibly at where environmental social governance initiatives have proven to do exactly what we're hoping them to do. And so possibly to look at providing an example of any successful ESG initiatives or investments that have delivered both financial returns and positive social and environmental outcomes. And I believe that there must be some examples. I see David is thumbs up. David, do you want to respond first? And then I see perhaps Brad. Cool. You're on mute, David.
I wanted to respond first of all to a question from Wasim in the chat. He says, how do climate campaigners respond to criticisms from the political right that efforts to pressure non-state actors to address environmental, social and governance issues is a subversion of democracy that grows out of the inability to mobilize society support clauses such as climate action. Well, I think, I mean, I would have the reservation, Wasim, that I don't think that those on the political right are concerned that that there's not enough climate action. But I think it's a fair criticism, and I think the problem that ESG, in a sense, is an industry response to a sort of democratic disconnect that's grown over the past 40 years or so. Since the Reagan-Thatcher era, we've had big business around the world clamoring for deregulation, which has contributed in good part to the climate crisis. And capital has, in a sense, responded with alarm, and part of that response has been to come up with the ESG strategies. But ESG is not actually a substitute for empowered democratic regulation in a democracy. So ESG is, in a sense, it can be a useful tool, but I think that the criticism that it's trying to do more than it should be, or that it's trying to make up for a gap that shouldn't be there. But unfortunately, it's a gap that we have to fill somehow. So I hope that goes some way to answering Wasim's question. ESG has been criticized by some people for doing too much, and by those of us, and by a lot of the rest of us, for not doing enough.
Thanks, David, and thanks for addressing that very important question. Are you wanting to also just talk about some of the ESG initiatives that you have seen success on before passing to Brad, or should we pass to Brad now?
Well, again, just very briefly, and this addresses a point that Ashley raised again. We've been partnered with, to some degree, with a local small boutique asset manager that has introduced an ESG fund that we like mostly because it excludes thermal coal and Sasol. And the performance of that fund, which is essentially a substantially divested fund, not 100% divested fund, but it's the closest thing to a divestment fund in South Africa, has been very good. And so I think we have to be cautious about the assumption that divestment is going to lead to a hit on returns.
Yeah, I think I've seen a number of things. So I've got my own shortlist. So I think I'm going to give names, but I think that one that you'd probably be talking about, David, is the Select BCI ESG Equity Fund, which is a fund implemented by core shares. And so, yeah, they've got a thermal coal exclusion, a Sasol exclusion, and they track the S&P South African Sustainability Index. And they are a purely South African equity fund, so South African shares, right? Now, look at this other fund, which, and by the way, this is investing rands, okay? The next fund also investing rands, not dollars, but rands, but this is a global global equity fund. The Portfolio Metrics BCI Sustainable World Equity Fund, and this can be found in Alan Gray 91, Glacier, Stanley. And if we look at these two things together, what you're able to do is create a well-rounded, globally diversified, sustainable, as much as possible portfolio that is invested for anything for 5 years and up, an equity investment. So by combining these two things, you're able to create a long-term investment. Now, the problem is when it comes to retirement planning, you can't have more than 75% of your investment in equity, okay, in shares, and you can't have more than 45% outside of the country. And so why those limits are there is because SARS is giving us lots of tax relief. So it's very good for a retirement planner to be able to get all this tax relief from an RA. So a retirement annuity is very good for somebody planning for retirement. But now, how do we do this? How do we invest sustainably for retirement if there's not if there's no solution? And I mean, the best one I can think of, Ashley, is this Sanlam Living Planet Fund, pragmatically following the 2015 Paris Agreement. I've spoken to the guys running that fund. And I think it's the closest thing you're going to get to what we can call a wholly balanced retirement annuity fund. But there's other things one can custom build. And this is where it comes to having somebody who is going to be doing all of this for you, because custom building something can be done, but it takes a knowledge of how to put these things together. So there are solutions out there, but this is where the regulator, the Financial Services Conduct Authority, FSCA, and the Financial Planning Institute of South Africa, which is the professional body for CFP professionals, these guys need to play ball with us. They need to say, okay, guys, sustainability, climate change, all this stuff is important. I mean, I sit and receive all of their notes and everything on a daily basis, and it's like it's not even an issue for them. So I have utmost respect for everything that they're doing, except that. So and I have to be real about it. So I think there's a lot of movement that everybody, like the people sitting on this call, are actually so flipping important, because it's us that are going to be able to take this message and to create awareness and drive it upward. Because without us, these things will just continually go, it might get fixed, but it'll be too late. And so it comes down to this. It's in our hands again. So sorry, just to say that you've got some South African rand-based funds that you can invest in. There's also Signia Sustainable Economy ETF, Element Investment Managers. They have some funds. Can't speak too much about their performance, but they have some ESG-centric funds. Innate is an investment platform that has some interesting things that you can invest in offshore. Very, very good sustainable investments. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to talk to anybody about them because they're not approved by the Financial Services Conduct Authority. So a client has to approach me with the name of the fund, and only then can I assist. There's ways to do that. I know David knows this fund is the Schroeder ISF Global Sustainability Growth Fund. I'm currently in chats with them. David, I'll give you information if I get any more. And then we all know about Morningstar. Morningstar provides some sustainability ratings using ESG factors. The problem is that not all funds are rated, and taking a lead on any one of these funds in particular is going to be a focused bet, and it becomes quite risky to include one fund based on one rating. So it's not so cut and dry, and you can't just put these things together, but there are solutions out there if one is willing to take the extra step.
Thanks, Brad. Ashley, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to proceed on where Brad left. In our space for Sanlam Corporate Investments, we've actually been engaging a lot of clients in terms of providing them with the non-fossil fuel-free solution, because there's so many of investors who are out there who are saying that we want to have bespoke, tailor-made solutions that have got no exposure into fossil fuel, and maybe just to also add over and above most of these equity type of portfolios that you mentioned, there's a multiple number of portfolios that are renewable energy focused, and that are also sustainable infrastructure focused. You see funds.
Sorry, Ashley, can I just cut in there? I just want to emphasize a point that you just made, but I think you just said that there are so many investors who want to have investments without fossil fuels. Is that correct? Because that's addressing a point that Wasim is making in the chat, which is, are there millions of discretionary investors who hate the climate exposure? And it sounds like, in your view, there are those millions.
Yeah,
So,
there is. I mean, from
so
the
my apologies for interrupting.
No problem. Yeah, certainly. So from the interaction, and even my colleagues on the call, from the interaction we have had, even in different conferences that we've been attending, there is appetite for clients who are saying that we want to invest into something that is aligned to our interest and our convictions. And we are in touch with some of the notable pension fund and retirement fund and endowment funds and family offices that have got interest into this portfolio. And we believe that we can customize that, we can tailor-make that, and without really sacrificing their returns. But again, to your question, Sarah, earlier on, in terms of what are the examples that really demonstrate that, environmental and social governance consideration into our investments does work. We have seen a formation of a lot of sustainable infrastructure type of funds out there, funds that are really putting their money into renewable energy projects. I mean, you see, you can drive now in the Northern Cape, you can drive up north in Limpopo. Mines are even now generating their own renewable energy, and they are really getting money from retirement funds. And I think those are type of the examples that one can make. I think it's also important as we talk about this conversation to also note impact funds that are out there, all right, that are SDG forecast, that are really measured. And you can see that there's actually both the dual return of the financial return and the social returns that are out there. And I think that speaks to the point that I want to make, that most of the time people resonate so well with that which can be measured. And the downside of ESG, which is what we see a lot in the US, I mean, most of the guys in the European side of the world, they are well ahead of the curve, but the US is divided on the basis of the measurement. So if I were to now take this BCI fund and I check it on Sustainalytics, or I check it on MSCI, or I check it on Arabesque S-Ray, I'm going to get different score of ESG. And I think that's where people have not really getting sold into this idea, on the basis that there's not been a standardization of the measurement of ESG and the outcome and the ratings. So today I can go to MSCI, I can go to S&P, I'm going to get a different score. And hence you see the likes of I mean, the skeptics like Elon Musk, for an example, who lost his mind to say, no, why is my company taken out of the index? And I think these are the conversations that we should be mindful of as we engage asset managers, as we engage laymen in the street. We also need to make them aware of the fact that this industry has not matured enough such that there is standardization of reporting that is the same across the board. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, that's some very important points there. And I think just looking at time, this has been such a rich conversation already, but just wanting to open it up to if there's any questions from the audience here, if anyone would like to unmute, we could take 1 or 2 questions. In the meantime, Brad, I saw you did unmute as though you wanted to say something.
Yes. Okay, cool. I've got a little bit of data here. It's always nice to put some good information out. So I mentioned to you, there's this portfolio metrics sustainable world equity fund. So here's part of the investment is an impact fund. All right. They actually make a difference on the ground, and the reporting is direct reporting. Some of the things that they've done is 800 megawatt hours of renewable energy generated, 850 tons of CO2 emissions avoided, 19.5 million liters of tap water for consumption distributed, 11 million liters of wastewater treated, 154 tons of waste material recycled and recovered, 160 people receiving healthcare treatment, 69 people benefiting from well-being programs, 185 days of tertiary education received by students. And that's like one of 11 funds in this portfolio. And that would be just the offshore equity portion of a portfolio. And I just wanted to circle back to something, is that an investor's, a person's future is very important, okay? And what we can't do is we can't just have a one size fits all. And so I think a very good way to get this started with individuals is to say, all right, yes, you're investing. Take some of your money and put it where your mouth is. Take it and put it to where it's actually going to be making a difference. And what you're doing then is you're allocating some of your portfolio, rather than taking a whole step and being all scared about what one is doing, which it really could be the case. And that is something that might be stopping a lot of people. It shouldn't be the case, and it's not necessarily is the case, but moving into something new and changing something can be very psychologically difficult. And so taking a little bit of your money and allocating it sustainably, what that's going to do is put you on that first step, or put that person on the first step. And slowly but surely they're going to climb. And when they get to the first floor, they're going to be pulling other people up with them. And so it all starts with minor little, small little changes, and along the way that everybody climbs the same flight of stairs.
Thanks, Brad. I see we haven't had any new questions come up, but there was a question from Sally on if there are any ways of taking out insurance products that don't contribute to the problem, or of putting pressure on insurers to divest from fossil fuels. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that's a good question for Ashley.
No,
well,
you can go ahead, Brad. Go ahead.
I don't have an in-depth thing, and I'll tell you why. But when one pays their premium, sorry, there's a lot of rain going on here. I hope I'm audible enough.
No, we can hear you fine.
Great. When one pays insurance premiums, the premium, a certain portion of the premium, certain portions of the premium, rather, should I say, are allocated to different players and different companies, different reassurers. And so what it comes down to is, the insurance policy itself cannot be ESG or sustainable, but rather how the insurance company and their reassurers are applying their funds and what they are doing. And so that's why part of my work is what I'm trying to do at the moment is get an understanding from each of the providers that I'm working with to try and whittle down to a good understanding of why I'm working with certain insurers. And it's not a question that they get asked. Honestly, it's a strange thing. It's like, oh, we'll have to get back to you on that one. Yeah, so I don't think that's so cut and dry. Ashley, maybe you've got some better insights on that.
No. Certainly, I'm not too close to the action in terms of the underwriting and the like. But what I can say is that the same premiums that you and I pay for any insurance, as insurance companies, we actually invest that money on your behalf. So if you're paying for your life cover, we don't just put that money under the mattress. We actually invest so that in the time of need, when you need it, you can actually get it. And hence, us embedding sustainability or responsible investment into our processes, because we believe that speaks to, that speaks to the interest of other people. Hence, we've got integration of ESG into our portfolios. We invest into renewable energy types of funds. We invest into impact funds because we know that at the end of the day, you don't just want to say, if I'm putting some money for my child to go to school in 2050, I don't want that child to go to school when there's nothing in this planet in which we live in. We want them to retire. We want them to live comfortably. Equally so, even the retirement savings is the same conversation we have. We use layman terms to say, if you have got somebody who works for the city of Cape Town and they live in Khayelitsha and they go to City Civic Center every day, either by my city or they commute. Today, if they retire at the age of 60 or 65, they are not going to move to Constantia and live there. Their money can't take them there. But one of the conversations we say to them is that you've got to consider the fact that you want to retire comfortably where you are. So when we invest, we don't want to just say we want to put our money into listed companies that when Naspers shoots the lights off, Koosbekker and friends will get richer. Why don't you invest into sustainable infrastructure types of funds, which can build running water and sanitation and proper transport in your neighborhood where you are? And really that speaks to that impact investing conversation that I mentioned earlier on. So I think that really speaks to the fact that the money we collect, we don't just collect it for the sake of it just being given to you at a certain point in time, but we invest it such that it achieves both for your financial return and your social and environmental return as well.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I think we have just 4 more minutes until we're at 67 minutes exactly. So wanting to bring it to a close, but thanking each of you for the contribution as speakers today. And thank you to everyone that has attended and inviting us all. I think there was one question that I would have liked to ask around how we can shift from thinking about investments from an individual perspective, but to a collective perspective. But I feel that that's really been answered in your question, or answered through your answers today, and it's something that everyone can think about going forward. So in terms of how everyone can get involved going forward. We invite you as part of Fossil Free South Africa to sign on to the Invest Fossil Free campaign. The link has now been shared in the chat. If you are someone who wants to build public support towards fossil free investments, take a look at the Planet A investment guide, and importantly, start having those conversations with your financial providers. Let's see how we can all move this forward towards investments for justice and sustainability. Thank you, everybody, and thanks to our speakers. You can say thank you. You can come on, unmute and say thank you as the speakers.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for attending. Thanks, Sarah, for doing such a great job facilitating. Ashley, Brad, thank you so much for participating today.
Appreciate it.
Look forward to further conversations.
What you guys are doing is an absolute, it's absolutely imperative, and I'm really grateful for everything that you do, and I'm sure we all are. So keep up the good work, and Ashley, thank you for being a conscious player in the industry. It's difficult to come through, find guys like you, so keep up the good work.
Thank you, Brad, and I appreciate it, David and Sarah. And I think, like Brad mentioned it, there's going to be an incremental change that's going to happen with the least amount of influence that you're making. And I believe that this conversation shouldn't just be pep talk. It shouldn't just be Mandela Day and we forget about it. But let's engage. Let's get to communities, because as I mentioned earlier on, nothing about us without us. So let's get to where the people are. Thank you so much.
We can talk more about that, Ashley. Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Bye,
it.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.